Until I saw his smile, I didn't think it could feel wrong. It was a smile that didn't belong to a real person. Rather, it was something that was practiced so much that it became ingrained. When I close my eyes, I can still picture the immaculate uniform, the shiny shoes, and that unchanging smile that hasn't altered in decades. I made reservations for my girlfriend Megan and I to go on a cruise last summer.
I need to see that again.
With her completing her medical residency and me finally securing a huge design contract, it was intended to be a celebration. Before life accelerated once more, we desired tranquility and calm. Therefore, we decided on the Ocean Majesty, a former luxury liner that had just been restored to its original glory. There was something strange about the ship as soon as we boarded it. Glistening decks, golden chandeliers, and new white paint made it appear beautiful. Yet beneath the beauty lay an eerie silence, the kind that for no apparent reason causes you to speak more quietly. The first crew member I saw was him, with a name tag that read Elias Guest Services. He stood at the gangway greeting passengers, his stance as straight as a ruler, and his expression fixed on that same polished smile. He was tall, well-groomed, and possibly in his late 40s. He shook my hand with more force than was necessary. His voice was smooth and serene as he responded, "Welcome aboard, sir." His final words, as though he was carefully considering them, stuck in my mind long after we had left. "We hope your voyage with us will be timeless." Our cabin was small but lovely, with the faint sound of the ocean outside and white drapes flapping across the window. It seemed like the ideal first night. With Megan smiling next to me and the sound of the waves hitting the hull, it seemed as though nothing could go wrong. Megan discovered an old trip brochure hidden in the vanity drawer when she was unpacking. The corners of the yellowed paper twisted. A photograph of the ship's original crew standing on the same opulent staircase we had passed earlier that day was displayed over the top with the words, "Ocean Majesty, experience a voyage beyond time." One face caught my attention right away. Elias. The same grin, the same jawline, the identical little scar beneath his chin too. I said softly, "Megan, take a look at this." She scowled as she leaned in. "This is from... what year is that?" "No way." I flipped over the page. 1983. She used the camera on her phone to zoom in. That's him. It was exactly him. I chuckled uneasily. Perhaps his father was also employed here? Or is it a promotional reuse of some sort? But my stomach felt empty even as I spoke. The picture didn't appear old. Rather, it appeared to have been taken only yesterday and had just been printed. The dining room was alive with courteous conversation and gentle piano music that evening. The scent of perfume and salt filled the air. Although the passengers were amiable, the atmosphere seemed subdued. Elias would move between tables every few minutes to greet guests, repeating the same phrases while grinning mechanically and fixedly. I was unable to look away from him, Megan once murmured. "He's by the mirror," as she leaned over. Avoid turning too quickly. I looked sideways while feigning to grab my glass. Elias stood close to the long, ornamental mirror on the far wall, gazing into his own reflection rather than the visitors. His mouth twitched as if he were mumbling something to himself or to another person. He grinned once again when we looked at each other in the mirror. A shiver of coldness ran up my back. Later that evening, as the ship's announcement system continued to crackle, a low hum permeated the air in our cabin. "Please stay in your cabins after midnight for planned maintenance, everyone. Thank you." Megan jokingly said that it was most likely deck maintenance being done by cleaning crew, but I had been on past cruises and none of them had ever requested that we remain indoors. I made an effort to shake it off. I went out onto the balcony to get some fresh air at around 12:40 a.m. The horizon was obscured by mist, and the water was infinite and black. I noticed movement on the bottom deck. Elias was there, moving along the railing at a leisurely pace. Even though the sky above was clear, his uniform stuck to him, soaking through as though he had been standing in rain. Every few feet, he paused to gaze at the sea below. Something metallic, resembling a ring of keys, was in his hand. After saying something inaudible to me, he tossed them over the side. He turned slightly, and his face appeared nearly colorless in the dim deck light. I briefly believed he was observing me. Then his gaze swept straight over me as if I weren't there. With my heart racing, I went back inside. Megan was murmuring that I was overanalyzing when she was half asleep. Even yet, I was aware that what I had witnessed was abnormal. Behind his composure was a weighty, old quality to his movements. Even though the sun was shining brightly the following morning, the ship's air seemed chilly. We paused at the lower deck cafe, where I asked the barista in passing, "Hey, that guy Elias, he's in guest services, right?" While Megan placed her coffee order, her smile went cold. I scowled and said, "I apologize, sir. I don't believe that person works here." She paused and lowered her voice before saying, "I met him when we boarded yesterday." She swiftly turned away, feigning to refill drinks, and left me standing there with a chill running down my neck. "You're not the first passenger to ask," she said. Megan and I explored the area around the crew quarters after breakfast. The lighting was dimmer and the walls were older. A board with the names of all current employees neatly displayed beneath each department was located next to a stairwell. Elias, no. However, a tiny, dust-covered wooden plaque hung beneath it. In memory of our lost crew, 1983 was written on the metal tag. My gaze flicked over the list of names before settling on one. Guest Services Representative Elias Carter. At sea, lost. The body never came back. Like a heartbeat buried somewhere beneath the ship, the floor beneath me throbbed softly, steadily, and deeply. A single thought developed in my mind, and my hands grew cold. Elias wasn't letting anything go when he tossed those keys into the ocean last night. He was making a call back. I still don't understand what happened next, but if anyone listening has ever been on that ship or seen a man who looks like him, you might want to subscribe. By the second night, the ship no longer felt like a holiday, but rather like a location in between two different eras. I made an effort to persuade myself that the plaque had no significance. Accidents happened on ships, and names were reused. Perhaps another crew member just happened to have the same name as a plaque for a man who had passed many years ago. However, I knew in my heart that wasn't it. Megan was unwilling to discuss it. I was fueling my paranoia, she said. I made an effort to concentrate on the typical activities, including the buffet, the pool deck, and the performances, but I couldn't help but notice him whenever I glanced around. Elias, at the periphery of a crowd, observing, not blinking, never getting old. The lights flickered twice during the captain's meal that night. It only took 2 blinks, but it was enough to have everyone in the dining hall gasp and then laugh it off. Elias was standing next to our table, grinning as like nothing had occurred when the lights returned. "Is everything okay?" Before I could stop myself, I asked, his head cocked slightly. "It's all right, sir." My skin crawled when he remarked, "We just had a small realignment." The strain in my chest persisted after dinner. I told Megan that I needed to get some rest, but my true goal was to see if I could locate the crew's accommodations. As I went down the lower levels, the corridors became more confined. The scent of salt and old paint permeated the air, and the sound of the engine seemed closer, like the heartbeat I had sensed before. I discovered a maintenance door propped open at the end of one corridor. Inside, an assortment of antique photos taped to the wall were illuminated by a faint bulb. When I recognized what they were, decades-old crew photos, my stomach fell. Elias was in each and every one of them, occasionally younger, occasionally older, but always smiling. One photo from the 1990s showed him drinking a glass of champagne while standing next to a group of new hires. He was by himself in front of the ship's ballroom in another from 2008. The backgrounds were altered. Around him, faces became old and disappeared. But he didn't change. I jumped when I heard a voice behind me. I quickly turned and saw an older man standing in the doorway wearing a maintenance jumpsuit. "You shouldn't be here." His eyes darted anxiously behind me, as if he thought someone else may be there, and his face was worn out. I stumbled. I was just looking for guest services. With a groan, He gestured for me to leave. "Believe me, you won't find assistance down here. You've seen him, haven't you?" he said quietly before I could inquire what he meant. "Some doors are better left closed." The one with a smile. I stopped. Slowly, he nodded. "Elias. He has more experience than any of us in greeting passengers. He drowned during the storm in 1983, according to the old crew. The sea, however, doesn't always let go. It retains its preferences." He leaned in and spoke in a whisper. "Avoid taking anything from him if he speaks to you again. Not a drink, not a promise, not a token." The man's eyes widened as a mechanical clang reverberated from farther down the hall before I could reply. "That's how he binds people." "Go," he growled. I ran, saying, "He's coming." The ship seemed to hum louder, almost alive, as my footfall reverberated across the metal corridors. Megan was standing at the mirror, pale and trembling, as I arrived at our cabin. "What's the matter?" Breathless, I asked. At first, she remained silent. She then slowly turned to face me, and a half-second later, I noticed her reflection move. In a whisper, she said, "I saw him. While you were away, he knocked on the door, claimed that you requested that he bring something. He left this." An antique brass key was in her shaking hand. The tag said Archive Room, Deck 0. For a moment, I thought I heard faint footfall in the hallway. Measured, purposeful, like someone pacing right outside our door, and the lights flickered again. Even through the metal, the key felt colder than anything should at room temperature as I took it from her fingers. Some part of me needed to know what it opened, but Megan wanted to toss it overboard right away. Perhaps it would demonstrate that there was a rational explanation, something that could explain everything. I was standing at the end of the lowest hallway, key in hand, facing a corroded metal door marked Archive Room at 1 a.m. as the ship swayed softly in the moonlight. The lock made a noise that wasn't appropriate for a contemporary ship when the key was turned. It was a sigh, not a snap. I entered. The stench of dust, salt, and something somewhat sweet, like rotting flowers, filled the room. The walls were lined with dozens of outdated passenger manifests that were piled high in filing cabinets. However, it was the mirrors, not the papers, that made me freeze. Mirrors were all over the place. There are innumerable reflections of me standing in a faint, limitless expanse on the walls, ceiling, and in some places, the floor. Elias was grinning behind me in one of those mirrors, not in the actual room, in the mirror only. He held up his hand and gestured for me to look back. I was unable to. My legs wouldn't move, even though every nerve in my body cried out for me to run. I felt a hand softly settle on my shoulder after that. Chilly. Damp. And Elias said, "Time doesn't move forward here," in a quiet whisper that seemed to come from inside my skull. The lights went out. Its circles. I was standing in the center of the archive room, struggling to breathe as if I had been underwater, when the lights came back on. The mirrors have vanished. The walls were now lined with sealed cabinets that appeared newer than previously, and the only odor left in the air was that of salt. The key nearly fell out of my hands because they were shaking so much. I grabbed the railing for support as I staggered back into the corridor. It all felt wrong. The lights along the ceiling buzzed like caged insects. The walls appeared thinner, and the metal floor hummed louder. The closest elevator's computerized screen wavered between non-existent numbers as I got there. Deck 8, Deck 9, Deck 0, Deck 10, and then nothing. In any case, I hit the button for our floor. The doors shut. The elevator sat there for a few seconds. Then it began to move, albeit erratically, with a slow, steady hum that sounded too deep to be the sound of any machinery. It jolted once, then twice, and finally started to drop. It wasn't our deck when the doors reopened. Beyond, the hallway was dim and lined with rusty brass fixtures and peeling wallpaper. It appeared to be from a different era, possibly the 1970s. I felt as though I were looking at a weak, slightly delayed reflection of myself in the elevator's mirrored wall rather than the actual me. Somewhere down the hallway there was the faint sound of a record player, soft music, muffled by distance. With my heart racing, I followed it. I seen a shadow pass the light from a cabin doorway halfway down the hall. There was a person inside. I peeked in when I should have turned around. There was only one lamp in the room. An elderly woman was brushing her hair while seated at a vanity table. She was just 20 years old when she looked in the mirror. Her voice came from the reflection rather than her actual mouth when she turned to face me. She whispered, "He doesn't age." I took a step back and almost fell over the doorframe, saying, "He just switches places." The woman's body now faced me, but her reflection remained motionless, grinning with unblinking eyes. She murmured, "He found you. He only needs one at a time." A deep, metallic moan that sounded as if the ship itself were twisting reverberated across the corridor. The room was deserted when the lights returned after flickering once more. Gone are the woman, the lamp, and the vanity. There was only a tiny chair imprint left on the carpet. I took off running. I just wanted to get away from that deck, but I had no idea where I was headed. After a while, I discovered a stairway that headed upstairs, and when I rushed into the main area, everything appeared to be back to normal. The passengers were giggling. It was lively music. Everything had been reset. However, Megan didn't appear relieved to see me when I discovered her seated close to the bar. She appeared perplexed. "Am I familiar with you?" she inquired. I felt sick to my stomach. She scowled and looked about the room as though looking for a way out. "Megan, it's me. Please don't, sir. My husband will be back in a minute." A man moved up to stand next to her before I could reply. He resembled me identically, but he was older. His voice sounded uncannily familiar. His hair was shorter, and his stance was more relaxed. "Is everything well here?" He put a hand on her shoulder and inquired. Megan gave him the same smile that she used to give me. I thought I was going to fall. As though the entire ship had caught a wave that no one else could sense, the chamber started to tilt. A little at first, then more forcefully. Glasses fell from the tables. The lights went down, and I noticed Elias standing behind the bar, facing the mirrored wall. His face was framed between mine and the older me, but not in the room, only in the reflection. He lifted his glass in a mute toast with that same impossible smile. I took a step back, trembling. "What are you doing?" I yelled, but nobody gave me a look. The passengers kept giggling, drinking, and avoiding me as if I didn't exist. Then I understood why. I was gone from every reflection. My own reflection had entirely disappeared, but the older me was still there. With my head spinning and my breath seizing in my throat, I dashed for the closest hallway. As I returned to the stairway, the temperature dropped and frost started to build on the railing. Every sound, including laughing, footsteps, and conversation, faded into a faint, far-off hum. Then, slowly, over the ship's hum, I heard Elias's quiet, calm voice once more. "Here, time doesn't advance." The brass key, which I had left in the archive room, was back in my grasp when I looked down. This time, however, Deck 0 was not mentioned on the tag. It read Elias, Cabin 47. I don't recall making the hike to Cabin 47. I only recall listening to the distant sound of the ocean through the steel walls while I stood in front of it, key in hand. The hallway was deserted. My shadow moved across the carpet as if it were attempting to creep ahead of me as the lights above flickered in and out. With its polished wood, smooth brass handle, and lack of scratches, the door appeared fresher than the others. However, unlike the others, the number plate was not printed. It had an irregular, hand-carved appearance. 47. It turned without any resistance when I slid the key in. I had never felt colder aboard a ship than the air that emerged from the room, the kind of cold that makes your breath seem sharper and louder, as if the air itself had weight, rather than the kind that makes you quiver. The cottage was mostly in shadow, but the lights within hummed softly. I anticipated mattresses, bags, and possibly some crew gear. Rather, the far wall was adorned with a single mirror, and there was already a figure standing in that mirror. It was me, but not in the same way. My eyes were wide with fear, my hair was matted, and my reflection was drenched. He appeared to have drowned. Then I saw that he was making a mouth motion. I tried to decipher his lips by leaning in closer. 3 words. again, and again. He alternates. The door behind me closed with a click. Although it was a gentle sound, it felt definitive. When I turned around, nobody was there. Just the dim hum of the lights and the slight tremor of the engines under the floor. Elias was standing next to my mirror when I turned around. "Aren't we strange animals?" His voice was lovely and calm as he spoke. Trying to say anything, but my voice felt dry, I said, "I always need to know who came before us." "Who are you?" He grinned. He moved closer, toward the ship, rather than through the mirror, saying, "I'm what keeps the ship moving." He did not follow his reflection. Instead, my reflection started to morph, flashing like film frames from various eras as it moved between dozens of faces, young, old, male, and female. The passengers and crew all had the same hollow smile on their faces, stuck in mid-expression. "You believe that a ship this size just transports passengers?" Elias spoke quietly. "No time is carried by it. Every decade requires a keeper, and every journey adds a layer. One disappears and is replaced by another." My voice broke. He interrupted. "You're saying you? I was the first, and you'll be the next soon." I staggered back, bumping into the door with my shoulder. It remained still. Elias continued to move forward till it seemed as though the distance between us was closing in. The slight pulse in the mirror behind him matched my heartbeat. I said, "I don't want this." "Neither did I ask for this," he said. "Neither did I." However, the sea selects whom it remembers. The room shuddered. Like water, the mirror started to ripple. All of a sudden, I was standing on a glass surface with black water flowing just beneath it, rather than a solid floor. Below, I could make out shapes, faces, outstretched hands, bodies drifting in slow motion. "All it takes is one promise," Elias said, reaching out to shake my hand. "One instant of surrender." At that moment, something within of me broke. The bewilderment and the terror all came together to form something primordial. The metal key was thrown across the room by me. It struck the mirror, shattering it in the middle. Underwater, the sound sounded like a thunderclap. This was the first time Elias's smile wavered. The surface of the mirror broke, and there was nothing but open, dark sea behind it. Instantly, frigid water began to flow in from unseen seams, overwhelming the chamber. The pressure was too great for me to get to the door. My hands and legs were frozen by the cold. Elias was the last thing I saw before the water engulfed my head. He watched me calmly, as though I were drowning rather than sinking into his reflection. Then there was darkness. Sunlight was streaming through our cabin's drapes when I opened my eyes. Megan was reading a leaflet while seated on the bed, the same one that began the journey. When she saw me, she looked up and grinned. "Good morning, sleepyhead. Are you all right? You appear to have seen a ghost." I wanted to tell her everything, including the flooding, the mirrors, and the key, but I stopped as I looked down at my hands. They were creased. The type of creases caused by aging rather than water. I didn't look like myself in the cabin mirror. It was older. My eyes were sunken, and the edges of my hair were gray. "Good morning, passengers," said a familiar voice as the intercom chimed overhead. "Elias is a member of your crew. Deck 4 will serve breakfast soon." I turned back to the mirror, and this time, as I smiled, my reflection smiled only a moment before I did. I tried to tell myself I was dreaming for the remainder of the day. Although the environment appeared to be the same, something underlying it felt off. No matter how many times I cleaned my hands, the air still had a slight salty odor, and the light from the cabin windows had a slight blue tint. None of it caught Megan's attention. She chatted about breakfast, the outings, and the evening sunset on the terrace while grinning and laughing. I felt a new kind of fear every time I looked at her. Not because she had changed, but rather because I hadn't. Not at all. The older version of myself was visible in every mirror I saw, including her sunglasses, the glass panels, and chrome handles. Time was slowly and steadily dragging over me like an unseen weight, and I could still hear Elias's voice in the backdrop of everything. The sea remembers. That evening, when most of the passengers were asleep, I ventured out onto the upper deck. Above me, the sky appeared, painted as it stretched wide, stars strewn across a pitch-black ocean. Standing at the railing was a uniformed crewman. He was young, perhaps in his early 20s, and I nearly didn't recognize him when he turned. Late at night, he smiled courteously as he asked. Daniel was written on his name tag. My throat was dry as I attempted to laugh. Indeed. He nodded and turned back to the beach, gazing into the waves, saying, "I couldn't sleep." Everyone experiences it on their first journey. There is a beat to the ship. Eventually, you'll sense it. His use of the word rhythm caused the hair on the back of my neck to rise up. Leaning on the railing, he stared toward the horizon as if he were waiting for something to emerge. "Are you ever accustomed to it?" I inquired. He gave a small smile. Used for what? He smiled a bit too broadly. The feeling that this ship doesn't stop. It doesn't. I swear the ship tipped for a moment as a burst of wind shook the deck chairs. Daniel was gone by the time I blinked. The sound of waves was all that was left. With my heart racing, I returned inside. The lights had been turned down to a drowsy glow, and the corridors were now deserted. I noticed movement behind one of the frosted glass doors as I passed the crew rooms. A tall man with a slightly cocked head remained motionless in the light, observing. I didn't look. I simply continued walking till I came to our cabin. With one arm stretched over the blanket, Megan was fast asleep. Her respiration was calm and steady. I wanted to cling to the hope that this would all be over when we docked tomorrow. However, I was frozen in place when I turned to put my watch on the nightstand. On the desk, the brochure she had been reading earlier was still open. This time, though, it wasn't the shiny, contemporary version we had picked up prior to boarding. Instead, it was faded, yellowed, and had curled edges. The name was changed, but the ship on the cover was the same. Maiden Voyage, the Atlantic Star, 1983, and Elias was in the middle of the happy team photo. With trembling palms, I turned the pages. Every staff photo had the same look and smile, even if they were from different decades and different uniforms. Then I noticed another picture close to the rear, me, dressed in the same uniform that Elias had. The same tag, the same vacuous smile. Below it was a caption that read, "Crew Supervisor, Elias Ward, 2025. I gasped. My digits became numb. The pamphlet fell out of my grasp and landed gently on the ground. The intercom crackled to life, and the lights flickered once. The voice was familiar and calm as it murmured, "Good evening, passengers. We are happy to say that the seas will be calm in the future. Thank you for sailing with us as always." However, Elias's voice had changed. I owned it. The reflection I saw as I turned to face the cabin mirror was the one I had seen drowning in the archive room, not the older one. His eyes went pale, his lips hardly moved, and water trickled down his face. From the other side, he lifted a quivering palm and pressed it against the glass. "Saw." I didn't. I was immobile. Then he uttered the same 3 phrases once more. He alternates. Other faces started to appear behind my reflection as the mirror started to fog from within. Dozens. Hundreds. Both passengers and crew. Through the condensation, they were all grinning. Megan was awake when I staggered back toward her, but the bed was alone. Her necklace was the only item on the pillow. The pendant was cold and corroded. Shouting her name, I snatched it, but the cabin door flew open with a blast of icy air. Beyond, the corridor was ankle-deep in water, the carpet rolling softly under the waves. Elias strolled casually into the dark water corridor, his uniform drenched, his smile intact. "It's time," he muttered. "The sea is unforgiving." He extended his hand and said, "It just changes faces." The world swayed. The water level climbed. And I saw him, me, us, all blending into a single, unending, rippled smile in the surface reflection. Everything was back to normal when the ship docked the following morning. Laughing and snapping pictures, passengers disembarked. Nobody inquired about missing persons. The new crew member greeted them with a steady hand and a familiar, courteous grin, but no one noticed. The sun shone on his name tag, Elias. And if a cheerful crew member greets you with a smile that seems a bit too flawless when you eventually join that same cruise line, simply nod courteously. Refrain from shaking his hand, because time doesn't pass on that ship, it revolves. Click subscribe if you've ever seen a grin that appeared too familiar or a face that looked older than it should be. Here's what you might want to hear next. And keep in mind,